Hello, Christian ministry students. This is a video that is a shortened lecture, really, that if you're in the seated class that meets the 27th or 29th of October, you could use this as a reference, but you don't need to watch it again. This is primarily for remote students. And it's about a culture in crisis. We're going to look at culture today for about 15 minutes. I'm going to try to condense the key points. No doubt everyone agrees that the United States is in a place of crisis. We use kind of as a benchmark year about 55 years ago. If we look at 1965 to 1970, violent crime has risen 12 times as fast as the population. A population increase of 41%, but violent crime increased 500%. There's no place like home. 25% of the imprisoned people in the world are in the United States, and 2 out of 3 are rearrested within 3 years. And there's a recidivism rate of 80%, meaning within the 5 years, 80% of prisoners who've been released will return. And it costs about $30,000 a year just to keep one prisoner incarcerated. Our suicide rate has more than tripled since that benchmark year. The divorce rate, over 300% in that time. And at this juncture, barely over half of all the kids in our country are living with their biological married parents. Great problems. We expected the public schools to solve the problems. God bless them, our great teachers and administrators. Not possible. If you took our benchmark year of the mid-60s from now, using their dollars, 50 plus years ago we spent on the average $2,200 a student. Today we spend on an average, using their dollars, of over $6,000 a student, and we still have all kinds of problems. Welfare spending has increased by 700%. And so where does all this money come from? It comes from taxes. Back in our benchmark period, mid-60s on, families were taxed by the federal government at about a 12% rate. And now the average is close to a quarter of our income, so more than half has been increased in order to throw money at these problems, and it's simply not worked. Let's get closer to home here, why I think these are problems. So, of course, difficulties between men and women. Domestic violence is by far the #1 cause of injury to women. If you go to our benchmark period in the mid-60s, 5 out of every 100 births were illegitimate. Today it's 1 out of every 3, with no look at it ever slowing down at all. The most violent and difficult problem persons are young males in our culture between ages 18 to 24, and then it tops off. You see a surge there during that time period. And here's really the prediction is we've come out of the baby bust, and there are now a lot more teenagers becoming young adults, which means there's going to be more crime and more difficulty in our culture that will come as a result. And why am I mentioning that? Why am I focusing on young males? Because if you look at the persons who are incarcerated, 70% of the incarcerated persons in this country grew up without a dad. No dad in their family. They're fatherless. In fact, that's the #1 predictor of whether one could go to prison or not. Is simply ask the question, did they have a father in their lives? The state of Wisconsin I grew up in, only 13, let's see, where is the number? Here, let me find it exactly. Yeah, only about 13% of the incarcerated juveniles in that state came from homes where they had a biological mom and a dad. So I think the key has to do with how do you raise human beings. I want to talk a little bit about father absence and its effect on children, and then in our culture more significantly. From a woman named Hetherington, a researcher at Indiana University years ago. She looks at 3 categories: father absence, dysfunctional dads, and functional dads. And mostly, let's start with the functional dads. She has what you call warm, available fathers. They tend to produce, first of all, in their sons. We're going to talk about the effect on sons, and then later on daughters. More masculine sons. Now that's kind of a loaded word, masculinity, but it means their sons are more comfortable in their masculinity, not hyper-masculine, show-off, bullies, things like that. And their sons tend to be more socially conforming. That is, they're less likely to get trouble with the law. So warm and available dads who are there with their sons, connect with them. Their sons tend to be more comfortable in their masculinity. and less likely to cause problems in culture. If there is no dad, father absence, no father in the house, the key is the first 6 years. Remember, that's the period when your personality is being formed. What does it produce in boys? And we are a father-absent society right now. I was evaluating a high school some time ago, and only 47% of the males in that local high school near Lindsey Wilson had their real dad in the home. What does father absence cause? One is a problem with sex role typing. That means they're not skilled in imitating adult male behavior. We call it compensatory masculinity. They try to make up for it and act tough and like whatever they think a man needs to be, or whatever they've watched on television or the movies, and then they act the way they do. It also shows up on their test scores. I could actually look at the ACT scores of young males entering Lindsey Wilson and tell with uncanny accuracy who were raised without dads. Young males who grew up without dads tend to score low on the numerical side and very high on the verbal side. In other words, they score like females do. Now, this does not have anything to do with femininity. It just means their focal point, their adult that they related to was a mother. And so their thinking, reasoning process tends to be much more like that of females. And then the last and more troubling was they seem to have a trouble with the conscience, internal self-control. And it's not saying that a great mother, and many heroic single mothers out there doing wonderful jobs, but this seems to be a disposition that is a problem, a difficulty with internal self-control, inability to delay gratification. You see that among young males, teenage males, problems with stealing and acquaintance rape. They will not wait. They have an inability to wait and difficulties. The problems are significant also in daughters who grew up without a father, but the problems tend not to show up more until puberty. And doesn't that just make sense? When you have young girls who are growing up relating to their moms, at least they have a same gender parent in the family. The thing you have to ask is, why don't they have a dad? If the father died, and that was a case throughout much of history, men tend to die earlier, accidents, wars we go through, there's kind of a shyness around men, a reticence we'll call it, because they haven't been around males. Now, I need to mention that if there's a grandfather rather, uncle, older brother, that can all reduce some of these symptoms, as is true for males, by the way. It's for young males. If you've got a significant older male, that helps him. But for females, dad dies when they're young. It's kind of a reticence. That's not the most common reason girls don't have dads. Their dads desert the family. They leave, or the dad's never there. And so if that's the case, there's actually a reverse effect, and that is they are more assertive. They're more assertive. They need that. It's a hunger for a male in their lives. And so that's why a girl who grows up in a home where there's no dad is more than twice as likely to become pregnant out of wedlock. It's almost like a need for a replacement for that male. Now, there was a study done back during our time frame period, back about 50 years ago, by two researchers from Harvard Law School, the Glucks, Sheldon and Eleanor Gluck, G-L-U-E-C-K. They had a book called Unraveling Juvenile Delinquency, and they were trying to understand these problems that were occurring at the time in more embryonic form, but now are dramatic across our culture. And what they did is they studied 1,000 boys who were delinquent. And these were 16-year-olds. Actually, in the study, the 1,000 boys, 500 were delinquents, 500 were not delinquents. And the delinquents had to be arrested for misdemeanor or felony. In other words, these boys didn't get picked up for jaywalking or smoking on the corner. They were already in trouble with the law. And with each one of these 1,000 boys, 500 delinquents, 500 non-delinquents, they did over 400 different variable studies. Psychological tests, analyzed the family, interviewing, genograms, complete medical exams, even measured the size of the genitals and the testosterone level, everything you could possibly think of. And the Glucks delineated 5 variables, 5 factors which seemed to appear in delinquent boys that impacted their likelihood towards delinquency. The first was lack of discipline by the father. Of course, father absent home, there's no discipline. Secondly, the supervision of the boy by the mother. Often these mothers were too worn out to even watch their children. Third, the affection by the father for the boy. Again, no dad, big problem. Fourth, affection by the mother. If the mother was not particularly caring, loving, compassionate, that was a problem. And then the fifth was the cohesiveness of the family unit. Those 5 factors, they predicted, would cause boys to be significantly likely to become juvenile delinquents. Now let's just think about it. What they were saying is that it's how they were raised in the home. Don't blame the culture, don't blame the school system, don't blame anybody else, don't blame the TV or the media. Let's look at the family. And so there was a group of researchers in New York City, God bless them, that said, well, if this is true, that it's the home that brings about these delinquent boys, then let's take a look at boys who are under 6 years of age, between 5.5 to 6 years of age, who've not yet entered the school system, and let's look at their home lives. And so they took 1,000 boys in New York City, and 200 African American, 200 Puerto Rican, the rest were Caucasian, and they looked at these boys, and they looked only for these 5 factors. They went each of these on. Remember, these are little boys. These are just 5.5, roughly, years of age, little kids, and they're just trying to look at only these 5 factors and seeing what they were like. And after they had gone and evaluated each of these boys, the researchers made a prediction on the folder that said, based on these 5 factors the Glucks identified, and if we see them or not within the home, we predict at age 16 this boy will either be a juvenile delinquent or not. They closed up the folders, put them in a vault, and 10 years later opened them and now tracked down almost all of the 1,000 boys. Now they're man-sized. They're 16 years of age. And here's what they had predicted. With 84.8% accuracy, looking at little boys who are not yet 6 years of age, they had predicted correctly whether they would become juvenile delinquents. And that was really rather startling when you think about that. And then, maybe even more so, they predicted with 97.1% accuracy which boys would be non-delinquent. Now, once again, remember, they were just looking at little boys, only looking at the 5 factors and predicting what they would be like at age 16. What did that tell me? It is about the home. It is about how we raise children. It is significantly about fathers. And we should ask ourselves the question, what can the church do to help? I promise you there'll be a test question on your final exam that will ask you to think about it, because the church is considered the family of God, and the church has the opportunity to help here and to assist. And if marriage is the cornerstone of a family, if the family is the cornerstone of a culture, so goes the culture as to how we raise these children. So you can see why in our class, Intro to Christian Ministries, we focused on the marriage, and now we focus on what the family does and how we raise kids. Thank you very much.